So basically, some of you who were on earlier will be familiar with this process, but for the rest of you, basically what I'm going to ask you to do, if you want to be in the economic development discussion, basically we'd like you to raise your hand. There's a Zoom option to raise your hand. So to do that, you basically need to click on the participants button at the bottom of your screen. Once you see the participants list come up at the bottom, there's an option for you to raise your hand. And by that way, we can know that you want to go to group 1. If you're battling to raise your hand, you can also just put in the chat box that you'd like to be put through to breakout room 1 to discuss economic development issues. And if you're still battling with that, please feel free to just tell us verbally that you're battling to do that and you'd like to go to breakout room 1. So I can see I've got a couple of people who have basically put their hands up, so that's very much for letting us know. So we're going to start to assign people to the room. So, and I think the rest, if you can just slowly put up your hands. So maybe you're still deciding which group you want to be on. But, and then I don't know if anyone wants to tell me if there's anyone in the chat function who's mentioned that they want to be in breakout room 1.
No,
no chat messages, Margaret.
Okay, great. So it seems like most people are working out how to do this, so that's great. And sorry, I'm just putting the last few people in, so I'm nearly finished with that. Okay, so great. So what's going to happen now is that I'm going to open the rooms, open the breakout rooms. So those of you who said that they'd like to go to breakout room 1, you should see that you have now been invited to breakout room 1, and you can actually click on the link to join that group. The rest of you, if you can just stay in this room, in the main plenary room, and we'll be discussing vulnerable communities. So I think that I can see, we're just going to wait a few minutes just to see if people who've gone to breakout room 1 have been able to find their way there. And I'm just going to start sharing my screen at the same time. So Ian, can you just confirm that my screen is being shared with the targets for vulnerable communities?
Yes, Margaret, I can see your screen.
Thanks. And is there anyone who's still here that would like to be discussing economic development and not vulnerable communities? Okay, it looks like everyone's happy and where they want to be, but please feel free to let me know if that's not the case. Great. Okay, so right, so what we're going to be discussing today is the thematic area of vulnerable communities. So I'm just going to do a brief presentation about that, and then we're going to go into a little bit more detailed discussion. Okay, I have got a note that someone would like to go to the economic development group, so I'm just moving the person now. Okay, great. You should be able to enter the economic development group now. Okay, great. So right, so for the target for vulnerable communities, there are 2 targets that have been put in the latest draft of the DCCS, and the first is to the transition of 100% of informal settlements in all previously disadvantaged communities towards climate resilience is facilitated by 2050. Okay, Teresa Silban, I see you've raised your hand. Is that because you'd like to go to breakout room 1? So let me just
yes, please.
Assign you to that. Okay, brilliant. Okay, I've just assigned you. You should be able to go across now. Okay, so I think hopefully, sorry for the interruptions for our group, but hopefully most people will have will have gone across now. Okay, so basically right, so let me just start again. So the first target is the transition of 100% of informal settlements in all previously disadvantaged communities towards climate resilience is facilitated by 2050. And then the second target is to integrate and align disaster management with climate change resilience by 2050. So one specifically focused on informal settlements and disadvantaged communities, and the other on disaster management. Okay, so basically, as Derek explained, for each of the thematic areas, we have a set of programs. So we have 3 programs for this one. So the first program is to facilitate the transition of all informal settlements in Durban towards climate resilience. And sorry, I seem to have got something caught in my throat. Hopefully it'll fix itself soon. Basically, there's a number of projects under that program. So I'm just going to go through those projects briefly. So the first one is to create awareness of alternative energy options and implement a basket of such options in informal settlements and semi-rural settlements. The second is to facilitate the adoption of resilient building designs and materials in informal settlements that promote heat mitigation, resilience, and flooding. Okay, the third is to facilitate the establishment of community systems that assist in the management of wastewater and stormwater. The fourth is to lobby for and facilitate increased ease of access of informal settlements to ensure effective, quick responses to climate change-related impacts. The next is to relocate high-risk informal settlements to suitable alternative available sites as per the IDP. And then the next 2 are to promote and facilitate the greening of informal settlements as natural flood attenuation and cooling solutions. And finally, expanded community-based early warning systems for floods, as well as waste management systems for informal settlements that are not being relocated that have a high flood risk. And you'll see that we have some empty spaces here under stakeholders and comments. So this is where we want to get some input from you about how you feel these projects should be implemented, maybe comments on whether they're already being implemented or who are some of the key stakeholders, etc. Okay, then the second program under vulnerable communities is to facilitate the transition of all previously disadvantaged communities in Durban towards climate resilience. This has got 4 projects. The first being to conduct community vulnerability assessments to identify and prioritize at-risk townships, traditional areas, and rural areas. The second is to develop and implement a pilot program to build climate change resilience in vulnerable rural areas that include mitigation of floods and health-related issues. The fourth is to develop resilient townships using climate change mitigation and adaptation solutions to improve livelihood and well-being. And the final one is to facilitate a climate resilience program in all townships, rural areas, and other human settlements that have been identified as vulnerable. And then the final program, 3, is to integrate and align disaster management processes in Durban with climate change resilience. And there we have the project of developing a contingency plan for Durban that responds to extreme and high impact storms and flooding events. Then a second project to facilitate effective disaster risk assessments, reductions and responses by integrating climate change risks into disaster management plans. And then the third project to facilitate meeting of the eThekwini municipality's multi-unit disaster management forums that prioritize climate change related risks and extreme events. And then the final one is to implement an early warning system for extreme events. So those are the projects that we are going to be discussing today. So what I'm going to do is just flip back to the first program that I mentioned. And basically what I'd like to do now is invite those of you who'd like to provide some comments on, basically, as Derek said, we're trying to think specifically about implementing these programs. So any comments on who are the stakeholders that should be involved in the implementation of these projects? Any comments on implementation processes that are currently taking place, etc. So basically, I'd just like to invite anyone. You can either put up your hand and just make some verbal comments. And what I'll do is I'll add them to the system, or you can basically put some notes in the chat box. So I don't think, yeah. So I don't, okay, so great, thanks. Lauren, would you like to go ahead and make the first comment?
Thank you, Chair. From experience, having dealt with informal settlements through housing and human settlements. I think human settlements will play an important role regarding the implementation for energy options. They're the stakeholders that engage with external organizations that are instrumental in assisting with informal settlements in terms of infrastructure and development. From experience, I'm currently working with the Parkington informal settlements where typologies have been proposed by external organizations that are developing typologies nationally, and eThekwini municipality is going to be instrumental in the rollout of typologies. In these typologies that we've reviewed at development management, we've seen no resilience with regards to energy efficiency in terms of options. We haven't reviewed the infrastructure based on that being dealt with other stakeholders or service providers within our organizations. However, if we could get human settlements involved, we could approach these organizations to ensure that these aspects which are essential are included with such development within the informal settlements. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Great. Thanks so much for those comments. That's really helpful. Okay, great. Does anyone else want to make any comments on this particular project? Any observations about how to implement? I think that was a really great comment because it's basically aligning with existing work to try and basically incorporate climate change into that. And I mean, this is an example of the process of trying to mainstream climate change considerations into existing policy and planning processes. Great. Okay, so there's no further comments on this project. So let's move on to the next project. So the next project is to facilitate the adoption of resilient building designs and materials in informal settlements that promote heat mitigation and resilience on flooding. So basically, this is now talking a little bit more about sort of adaptation options for informal settlements. So I think that Lauren, I imagine some of your comments that you just made on the previous point apply to this as well. Does anyone else want to add on anything specifically around like adopting resilient building
Great, there's a comment from
Great. Thanks,
Asia.
Dan. Do you want to go ahead and read it?
Sure. It's from Asia Khan, and she says, is there anyone from informal settlements in the meeting?
No, I'm not too certain if there's anyone. I don't think the municipality itself has an informal settlement section, so it would be the Human Settlements Department. But I'm not sure if we have anyone who actually lives in an informal settlement in this particular meeting. I'm not sure if anyone does. If anyone wants to just let us know. Okay, Asia, you'd like to chat to the issue, so please go ahead and go ahead and chat and talk. Asia, I don't think you unmuted. I don't know if you want to unmute yourself, because we can't hear you right now.
Oh. Is it? Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Yes, we can.
Sorry, I'm kind of on the phone. Yeah. No, yeah. I'm worrying about buy-in from the dwellers in the informal settlements. It's like we have all these good intentions. We want to uplift our communities, and all these actions that we do, they are like excellent actions. But I'm wondering about buy-in. How do we get them involved, and how do we get input from them? That's why I asked the question. Is there any representation from informal settlements, or how are we going to go about, I know this is about creating awareness. So how are we going to go about getting into these communities? Human settlements is one thing, but that's a formal organization. It's government. But now this is now where the people themselves. How do you get them involved? That would be my question. Okay.
Okay, no, I think that's a great question. I'm not going to attempt to answer it because I think this is really, we're starting to talk to the issue of implementation. So I'm not sure if other people want to provide some suggestions on that. I do think that is an important aspect that has to be considered, the involvement of informal settlement dwellers and representative organizations of informal settlements in this process. Nagesh, would you like to go ahead and respond to that issue or talk to another issue?
Thanks, Margaret. Apologies, I came late, so I'm not sure how much I missed. I was just jumping in between meetings. You know
okay,
what?
No, I think you haven't missed too much, so you'll be good. Yeah.
Sure, no problem. What Asya raised, I think, is important. While it can be perceived that roping in people from the informal sector is important from implementation, I think importantly we need that input, or maybe not all of it, some of it, for planning purposes, because you know there's the unknown unknowns, just things we don't know that we're neglecting. I mean, I had a simple logistical challenge that between the few coordinators that were there, we said, okay, we'll do X, Y, and Z, but after just two sentences with the guys that were actually having to do the work, we had to throw the entire plan out and reformulate the plan with the guys present. So I think it'll be important to get them to provide input for development of the plan as well.
Great, thanks so much for that point. Anyone else got a point on this? Okay, great. So I think what we'll do is move on to the next point. So the next project on the list is to facilitate the establishment of community systems that assist in the management of wastewater and stormwater. So this is really speaking now specifically to wastewater and stormwater issues, so a little bit linked to the previous one. I think the points that Asya and Nagesh made earlier, I think all obviously apply to this as well. And also I think the point that Loyan made. But does anyone else want to make some additions to this? Any additional points beyond that that we should be noting around the implementation of facilitating the establishment of community systems that assist in the management of wastewater and stormwater? Okay, I don't see any points on this, so let's move on to the next project. I think that these projects, quite similar broad issues that have been raised for the previous ones, that are very applicable.
Margaret, there's a hand from
okay, then
Loyan.
The next. Okay, Loyan, please go ahead. Thanks. Yeah.
Sorry, Chair. I just remembered from my experience with Parkington informal settlements. What has happened is there is the development of reblocking in terms of designs with regards to existing informal settlements to ensure resilience with regards to wastewater management and stormwater control in the layout of the structures in the area. So basically what has happened is they are going to sort of formalize informal settlement areas. It is the process or intent via the human settlements program, and to ensure that there's resilience with regards to the disaster management emergency prevailing circumstances. So that's what that project, Parkington Informal Settlement Project, is speaking to. So with regards to the management of wastewater and stormwater, that is the process that is adopted regarding this form of intervention with regards to informal settlements. Thank you, Chair.
Great. Thanks so much for that. And I see Prashar has got a point. Prashar, would you like to go ahead and add on to that or make a new point?
Sorry, it's reverting to the previous one that Magesh made. I'm not sure if I'm going too far ahead. My thought was around the existing already informal settlements that are already built on floodplains. And if we want to make these areas resilient, how do we relocate people? Because they're already there, existing around these floodplains over plus minus 20 years. So that I find to be an issue. How do we relocate people who are already existing within these informal areas around these floodplains?
Okay, great. No, thanks for that point. We do actually have, sorry, I've made a bit of a mess here, but we do actually have a project on that. So I think that's very relevant. So, so what is the process of relocating them if they are on floodplains? So I'll put that note down here. Great, thanks very much for that point. Okay, so we've had this point, we've had a bit of discussion now on stormwater, and perhaps we can also, there's also a project here about lobbying and facilitating increased ease of access of informal settlements to ensure effective, quick responses to climate change related impacts. I think the point that Lauren made about reblocking obviously also does apply to access. I think that's also one thing that reblocking is meant to talk to. And I think that, so does anyone else want to add additional points on this? Alternatively, we have started discussion on the next project, which is to relocate high-risk informal settlements to suitable alternative available sites as per the IDP. I think the question that got raised is quite relevant, is that obviously it's quite hard to do those relocations, and how would we do the relocations? I don't know if anyone feels they've got any comments specifically on that question. Anyone wants to find out a little bit, add a little bit more on that? Okay, I think there's no further points on those. So let's just go through to the last two projects. So promote and facilitate the greening of informal settlements as natural flood attenuation and filling solutions. So this is specifically talking to really using you know, our biodiversity to try and assist with some of the natural, to assist with basically flood management and heat management. So I'm not sure if anyone's got any points to make about that. Any comments on that? Okay, I'm not seeing comments on that particular point. So the final point we have here is basically expanded community-based early warning systems for flood, as well as waste management systems for informal settlements that are not being relocated and that have a high flood risk. So I think this point specifically is highlighted the fact that it hasn't always been possible to relocate communities. And in those ones, there needs to be some priority of managing, trying to put in flood management systems and also having early warning systems. So I'm not sure if there are any further comments on this. Okay, Lauren's got a comment. Lauren, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Just from memory, attending a seminar done by Kirsty Carmen from Cape Town University with regards to a pilot project that was run revolving around a informal settlement establishment, which faced problems with regards to flooding and being formed on the banks of a primary river source. And what had happened is the department basically utilized forms of design with regards to SUDS and DWATS management, which is quite familiar in our institution. If you look at our wastewater management teams, they have programs experimenting around DWATS, and if you look at Jeff Tooley's team in coastal and drainage, SUDS is also a management program that's being implemented. So obviously we need to put these programs in place with regards to prevailing circumstances to try and alleviate some of these problems that are being faced with regards to informal settlements. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thanks very much. Okay, great. So I don't see any more hands. So I think what we'll do now is go on to the next program. So this program very specifically looking at the issue of informal settlements, but the next program basically looks a little bit more broadly about vulnerable communities in general, or previously disadvantaged communities, and trying to help achieve climate resilience there. So with regards to that, the first project there is to conduct community vulnerability assessments to identify and prioritize at-risk townships, traditional areas, and rural areas. So this project is really about trying to understand, well, which communities are the most vulnerable. So obviously we know that informal settlements get particularly impacted by climate change, but there are other communities that also are very impacted. And this is trying to understand which ones those are. So I don't know if anyone's got any comments about who would be the key stakeholders to involve in this project, or any comments about how to go about implementing that.
Margaret,
Yeah,
I might have some suggestions to kick
start
the
discussion. Go ahead.
You know, at a ward level, they have ward committees, and the ward committees are normally tapped into the community. So I think at a stakeholder level, we could use ward committees to start accessing, you know, locality-based information. And traditional leaders, you know, there are, what do you call it, mechanisms in the city already to access traditional leadership. I mean, we all have traditional leaders sitting in council. So I think traditional leadership is a must, not just for this one aspect of vulnerability assessment, but also for the broader plan as well. I think those would be the two from a community point of view.
Great, thanks very much for that point. Okay, so I think the next project here is developing and implementing a pilot program to build climate change resilience in vulnerable rural areas. Okay, so this is specifically trying to test out some ideas about putting climate change resilience into vulnerable rural areas, including mitigation of floods and health-related issues. So more of a rural focus. I think some of the points that Magesh made here, obviously traditional leaders are very important in our rural areas and would be important stakeholders in that. Magesh, go ahead and if you want to carry on commenting on that.
Margaret, I have a question, and I don't mean to sound okay. I don't mean to sound anything negative, right? But I see develop a pilot and implement a pilot program. Do you not think that we've had enough pilot programs? Sorry, my Labrador is going berserk in the background. Do you not think we've had like enough pilot programs where we can actually extract the information we need from all of the programs we've had already to then roll out some sort of broader program that would address resilience? That's just a question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's entirely possible. I think it's probably maybe other people to comment on that, but I think perhaps this project could be reformulated a little bit to say, let's try and understand what's previously been done and then roll out a bigger program. I think that's a very good point. I don't know if anyone else wants to comment on that, if they feel that we could go ahead beyond a pilot at this point with rural areas or not. Okay, I'm not seeing any comments on that. So I think people are agreeing with Gesh's idea that maybe in this case we want to go beyond the pilot program. Okay, so then I think the next project is around developing resilient townships using climate change mitigation and adaptation solutions to improve livelihood and well-being. So this is really more focused on township areas as opposed to rural areas. So I'm not sure if there are any points on this. I think this point isn't saying that there should be a pilot program. So I think perhaps that's another reason to kind of endorse Magesh's point above. It's perhaps why pilots in rural areas when we're not suggesting that for township areas. Not sure if anyone's got any comments on this. Okay, I think we're going to move on to facilitate. The final project under this program is to facilitate a climate change resilience program in all townships, rural areas, and other human settlements that have been identified as vulnerable. So I think everyone will be able to see this is a bit of a catch-all project because the previous two have spoken specifically about rural areas and townships, and this is really to say, possibly there are other vulnerable communities that might be identified that need to be addressed in some manner. So it sort of links up to the previous points. And I don't see any hands up on this particular issue. So I think we're going to move ahead to the next program area. So this is the final program, program 3. So for program 3, we basically have the program of integrate and align disaster management processes in Durban with climate change resilience. Okay, so this is a bit different from what we've been discussing because it's speaking specifically to disaster management. So the first point is the need to develop a contingency plan for Durban that responds to extreme and high impact storms and flooding events. So basically, this is highlighting that this is something that Durban really expects to experience a lot more of, and we need a contingency plan for that. So does anyone have any comments to make, any points around how this should be implemented and who are some of the key stakeholders that are relevant for this particular project? Okay, so I think obviously the disaster management section of the municipality is key on this. And I know they have been making some progress in this regard. Okay, and then we've got a point from Lloyd and Magesh. So Lloyd, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. And it's also speaking to the previous slide that you had and our previous speaker, Magesh, who I concur with regards to having enough pilot projects. Chair, may I suggest there is a project that's being implemented at City at the moment, and it is the Parkington project revolving around the informal settlement. It's also an answer to the disaster management with regards to implementation of structures in terms of being resilient with the current prevailing circumstances. Also in terms of the layout that's proposed in terms of reblocking. So it's kind of ticking all the boxes to all your points, headings that are under these topics for discussions. So just as a project, a current project, may I suggest we look into this as a precedent with regards to implementation of our resilience with regards to informal settlements regarding climate change. Thank you, Chair.
Great. Thanks so much. And then Magesh, did you have a point? I thought I saw your hand up, but it's not up anymore. Oh, Asia, I see you've unmuted yourself. Would you like to make a point? Oh, Magesh, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Margaret. Apologies if I'm speaking too much, right? So just censor me if I'm hogging the floor too much.
No problem. Please go ahead. Yeah.
So I've been in the city a long time, and I remember discussions, a number of years ago, where the city was talking about Pinetown actually being, the alternative. Things had to go bad in Durban, like a flood or a tornado, whatever it is. So I'm not sure if it's wise then to tap into those processes and the business continuity team as well, because we kind of like got a plan for the worst here. Again, using the COVID-19 lessons, so that whatever happens, we have a site that's 50 kilometers. Well, it's not 50 kilometers; it's 20 kilometers away. It's on a different grid, and so on and so forth. So. Because if the city operationally doesn't function, then we kind of, everybody else suffers. So I think we kind of like have to break that down into, develop a contingency plan for Durban. I think we should break that down into like city operations, and then the different subsectors there. If bridges get washed away. I mean, I read an article in a business magazine a few days ago, where they were, there was a South American country. There was a massive bridge built to withstand flooding, and so on and so forth. And the floods came, the bridge stood, but all of the roads leading up to the bridge was washed away. and then the river had actually changed its course. So I think like if we plan for the worst, then those plans can be utilized for less negative impact risks or impacts. Yeah.
Namaste.
Okay, great. Right, thanks very much. I see Lauren's also got a point. Lauren, would you like to go ahead? Okay, I think maybe that was a previous hand up that I saw. So let's not, let's move on.
No,
so great,
sorry,
thanks for those points, Mukesh.
Sorry, Chair.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chair.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let me continue. My mute on.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, Chair. Apologies. Just to reiterate on what Magash has just mentioned regarding Pinetown as the alternative to any informal settlement. What happens with informal settlements and the way they are designed, well, so to speak, how they form is where people find the need to be closer to an environment that supports their income. So you might find a lot of people that are in the informal settlements don't really live here. They are probably just here because economically it makes more sense for them to be closer to the place of work as opposed to where they generally live. So that's part of the reason for the informal settlement occurring. And what happens is when you try to relocate people, often the problem is, you know, if you look at housing and the spatial design of it, you find that people often move somewhere closer or the next alternative close area because it will still serve their needs with regards to accessing their place of work and being cost effective. So that often is the motivation for informal settlements to occur. So if alternative areas are further away and there's a implication on cost with regards to the need or the pull for them to basically settle nearer to the place of work, it's not going to work for them. They're just going to look for a closer area that's prevailing around their place of or environment of finance. So that we need to be mindful of as well. I just want to raise that one point. Thank you, Chair.
Oh, thanks. I think that's an excellent point. Great. Thanks very much for sharing on that.
Margaret, it's 10
Okay,
to.
so great. Thanks very much. Yeah, so I think that, right, so I think let's move on to the next project. So this next one is to facilitate effective disaster risk assessments, reductions and responses by integrating climate change risk into disaster management plans. So this is really trying to say, obviously we've got an existing set of disaster management plans, but do these adequately take into account climate change risks? So trying to basically add on that. So I think there has been a bit of discussion already, points made on the previous thing, actually talked to that a little bit. I'm not sure if anyone has any other points that they'd like to add on this.
I've got a comment, Margaret, from Asia Khan, and she says, on the point of contingency plans.
Contingency plans. Okay, great. Asia, would you like to go ahead and make your point, please?
Hi, sorry, Margaret. No, I was just going to say that there is a disaster management plan for the city. And so if we're going to draw up a contingency plan, you should be careful to align with them.
Mm-hmm. Great. No, I think that's a very good point. I think, yeah, there's a need to maybe just check in on the terminology and how these things will interact with each other in order to really take that one forward. So thanks very much for that point. Okay, so I think then the second to last project for this program is facilitate, I think this is actually a mistake here, meetings of the eThekwini municipalities multi-unit disaster management forums that prioritize climate change related risks and extreme events. So I think this is really saying, well, there are existing forum meetings, but there also need to be kind of meetings that really provide an opportunity to exchange knowledge and capacity build on climate change related risks and extreme events. So I think, I'm not sure if anyone's got a specific comment on that. There's no hands, so let's move on. And then the final point is to implement an early warning system for extreme events. Yeah, go ahead, Mukesh.
Sorry, it was quicker to unmute myself than to try and find that button to put my hand up.
Yeah.
This multi-unit disaster management forum, would it not fit somehow into the TTT or the subcommittee? You know, because then we, particularly what Asya was talking about dovetailing and not creating plans that conflict and so on and so forth. Perhaps we can use these existing forums to leverage off.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And just to highlight for those people who may be not aware of the terminology, that the TTT subcommittee refers to the technical task team that's been set up by the municipality, especially to basically coordinate municipal response around climate change. And there's basically a committee of senior people, so that's the TTT, and then there's a subcommittee of basically delegated officials who've been asked to specifically deal with this. So I think that's quite a good point. So I think broadly, just to reiterate, I think Mugesh's point is that you don't want to try to overlap too many things. So how would these fit together? Is there a way that perhaps a TTT subcommittee could play a role, etc.? Great. Okay, thanks very much. And then I don't know if anyone's got any final points on the implementation of early warning systems. So that's obviously quite an important thing, is how do we actually notify people in Durban if there are extreme events coming? Because there is evidence, obviously, once you get to that point, that makes a big difference. Mukesh, would you like to go ahead and make a comment on that?
Thanks, Margaret. I just have a question. I remember some time ago there was discussion that only the South African Weather Service could issue, warnings and stuff like that. So while, I can't remember which officials were involved in setting up those systems, which seem to be quite effective and efficient, I think officially we're still stuck in that bureaucracy and legalities. So I'm not sure if that's been sorted out or.
I'm not actually aware of that. I'm not sure if anyone else, but I think it's an important point. And I imagine that there are ways of implementing a system that only is based on SARS information. So I suppose that's an important kind of caveat, is that you don't want to be providing inaccurate disaster information. I suspect that kind of issues about. So obviously, whatever system's established has to kind of be in line with SARS and any other national requirements on how early warnings are sent out. Okay, I don't see any other pans or comments on these points. So thanks very much to everyone for participating in that. I think we've got some good observations. I think some things need to just be changed a little bit to align better with some of the comments, and then also some additional considerations on implementation there. So what we're going to do next is go to a little voting exercise. So we basically have, I have put all the different projects that we've just discussed now in front of you. So these projects, I put also letters, so A, B, C, D. I think that's pretty clear. So we've got A to O. O is the final letter there. So I think everyone will be aware of what we did in the people who participated in the previous session. What we're going to do is basically try and identify which are the priority projects now that really need to be considered as ones to take forward. And I just want to highlight just some points about prioritizing. I've managed to, yeah, so basically when we're thinking about priority projects, some things to consider is, does it unlock other interventions? Can it be achieved in the next 5 years? So, okay, let me just go back to the first point. Does it unlock other interventions? So is this intervention needed in order to basically take other projects forwards? Can it be achieved in the next 5 years? And does it address urgent risks? So I think the point here is that while we'd ideally like to pursue all the projects that have been listed, we possibly can't and have to choose ones that we need to prioritize. So which of those would be the ones that we really should consider. So here are the projects in front of everyone. So I'm going to give everyone a little bit of time to look at the project. So obviously these first ones here talk to program 1, which is the transition of informal settlements to climate change resilience. Then these 4 here speak to program 2, which is the transition of all previously disadvantaged communities towards climate change resilience. And these final 4 speak specifically to program 3, which is already around integrating and aligning with disaster management. So what we'd like to suggest is, the idea is for everyone to have 3 votes and to basically type in the chat function what they would like to vote for. So so you can just put in the letters of the projects that you think are the most important. Yeah, if you could just put that in the chat box. If you're battling to access the chat box, please feel free to just unmute yourself and also just read out your letters to us for the voting process. So we'll just take a few minutes so people can familiarize themselves again with these projects and just wait for a few votes to come in.
Margaret, the breakaway group for economic development is still on their discussion phase.
Okay, great. Thanks for letting me know that. Okay, yeah, so I don't see any votes coming in. Does anyone want to kick off the voting process? So if you just put in the chat function, or perhaps you could let us know verbally what you want to vote for if you're battling to find the chat function.
We've got a vote
okay.
in.
Great, thanks very much to Montable for clicking out starting the thing. So Ian's going to read them out to me as he sees them. So Ian, you want to go ahead?
So A, H, and F. And then there's a second vote is in from Linda. A, C, and F.
Okay, great. I think we're seeing a few trends here. So a lot of interest in the
Aisha has a hand up.
Yeah, Aisha, would you like to go ahead and chat and make a comment? If you just unmute yourself.
Yeah, Margaret, they all look so good. I'm still deciding. I'm looking at H for starters. I think that's the one where you have to do a risk assessment or something.
Yeah.
I like that one. And
okay, great.
Okay, and the other one was something about. Okay, C is okay. C is looking good. Accessing. The one about wastewater, yes, I think that's nice. And I think the one about where they access lobby for and facilitate increased ease of access for effective quick responses to climate change related impacts. I think that one, yeah. They all look so good. Okay, they do.
Great. Okay, thanks so much. Thanks for that comment. Anyone else want to give us the verbally? We still have. Okay, great. I think
we've got another one. Yeah, A, H, and C.
And C. Okay, great. I think there's a lot of interest in similar projects, so that's great to see that there's quite a lot of synergy. So, I'm not sure if anyone else wants to give us a vote before we move on. So yeah, I think I think it would be nice if we got a few more votes from a few more of you participating. It would be great just to give us a little bit more of a sense of if the trend of A right, great.
Yeah,
so
another one.
Thanks very much. B. Okay, do you want to read that out to me?
Sure. K and L.
Great, thanks so much, Nasima. Going a little bit against the trend there, see, but it's good to have some new projects introduced into it. Anyone else want to give us anyone else have specific projects that they want to vote for? Okay, so I think looks like we've had everyone voted who is going to vote. So let's just see now what are the main things here. I think basically there are 3 projects that have all tied for first place. So that'll be this create awareness of alternative energy options. So I think there's been a strong for informal settlements, and I think we had some quite useful comments there about how to incorporate that into existing initiatives like the topologies that have been developed for informal settlements and that. Then facilitate the establishment of community systems that assist in the management of wastewater and stormwater. So that's also come out as one of the top projects. And I think again we got some quite useful comments there about how to how communities are already dealing with that. So how we can essentially sort of take those type of projects and then roll that out to a bigger grouping. And then this next project here that basically came out strongly was to conduct community vulnerability assessments to identify and prioritize at-risk townships, traditional areas and rural areas. So those are the 3 areas that we've had a tie for first place.